Do you want to learn more on how to put money to work in regenerative food and agriculture? Follow our video course via investinginregenerativeagriculture.com/course or in the links below. Now, on to the podcast. What could the role of the crowd be in transition finance for farmers? Not just to speed up their regenerative practices, but also to transition from active farmer to retirement and freeing up the land to the next generation, without selling out but still have a comfortable pension. And what could Benedikt, who is absolutely not retiring, do by partnering with the crowd to free up capital to invest in his regenerative transition? Listen to this interview with Thomas, who has enabled local regenerative farmers in Germany to raise over 4.5 million euros from the crowd. Welcome to Investing in Regenerative Agriculture and Food. This is a special dedicated series on transition finance. Why are we recording this series? Many farmers are ready to speed up their regenerative transition. They've looked for learning, done the courses, read the key books, hosted the gurus on their farms, explored farm-size regenerative designs, and most importantly, started their pilots and feedback loops. This is where transition finance is key. A local bank loan often isn't feasible because of the short duration, lack of flexibility, and the farmer's lack of collateral. Furthermore, there's a limit of how much equity a farmer is able or willing to give away. That is why my co-host, aspiring to be regenerative farmer Benedikt Bösel, and I are embarking on a journey to find out what are the key principles of transition finance for regenerative farmers. We are interviewing leading practitioners in the regenerative agriculture and food finance space. They share their insights, how they would finance the speed up of the regenerative transition on Benedikt's 1,000 hectares, which is almost 2,500 acres, farm in Germany close to Berlin. This is an open process. We are sharing our lessons through the podcast episodes as we go along. We don't have the answers yet, just a lot of questions. So please share with us any examples of transition finance you've seen, other inspiration, people to interview, etc. Get in touch via the contact page on the website, investinginregenerativeagriculture.com. That is investinginregenerativeagriculture.com. Welcome to another Transition Finance for Farmers series episode. Today with Kliemt-Rippel, friend of the show who has been on here already twice. I think that's a new record. And we're very happy to have him back and dive deep into the crowd side of investing in regenerative agriculture and specifically transition finance for farmers. And obviously my co-host and partner in crime, Benedikt Bösel. So welcome to both of you, Thomas and Benedikt.
Thank you, Koen. Thank you for having me on the show again. A lot has happened since we last talked.
Indeed. Hi, Thomas. Great to have you.
And to that, Thomas, can you, for anybody, I obviously linked the two interviews we did before below in the show notes, but can you, you already alluded to a lot has happened since we talked. If you had to pick one thing, it's very difficult because you operate on so many different chessboards. What have you been busy with since the last time we talked, which was actually the beginning or the end of last year? So the end of 2019. And what has been happening in the last 6 months, apart from all the craziness, obviously?
Well, yeah, as you say, the last 6 months have been crazy for all of us throughout the world. But for us, actually, we have received a lot of positive attention, and we have a lot more new members, and we're receiving more citizen capital than before the Corona crisis. So this is really a positive surprise. I was not sure how it's going to turn out. I was thinking maybe people are going to hold tight to their money, being afraid of economic consequences. But the opposite happened. We have a lot more people investing and making capital available because regenerative agriculture, local agriculture has been a big topic. We've heard all about the slaughterhouses that are in the news in Germany, but in all over the world as big hubs of spreading corona and the work conditions there and everything. So initiatives like ours are receiving positive attention. But besides that, what has happened in the past year is that we have now really started to take over entire farms. So before we were helping farms to secure the land that they have been mostly leasing for a long time and then to buy it, so to secure it permanently. And now we are receiving a lot of requests from farmers who are retiring or want to retire and don't have children who want to take over the farm and they want to hand it over to the next generation. And this issue of them needing a retirement so that they can leave the farm. They need money so they can leave the farm and buy themselves a house. They need a monthly retirement. And at the same time, the young people who want to take over farms, they don't have the money to buy a farm and to pay a farmer a retirement for the rest of his life. And this is where we have now started to play a big role. And this has really opened up a lot of new avenues, and we're growing really quickly. So we're doubling our balance sheet this year. We're doubling the number of hectares we're taking over. And this has pushed us to think about how to create more decentralized structure, to create a kind of hierarchical organization in the sense of Frédéric Laloux from Reinventing Organizations, the Teal organization. That is our goal. We're actually reading that book together as a team, and it's been a big inspiration for us.
That's amazing. So basically, I mean, I can imagine the growth that happens because of that, because before you were helping maybe relatively small farms to secure the land underneath their farm that they've been farming for quite a while and that maybe came on the market or was threatened to be sold. And those are X amounts. And then now, because I think we talked about one of the first cases of the pension plan you're helping farmers with. Last time we talked, but it was one or two maybe. But those are obviously complete farms, much larger amounts, real estate on it. So the amount of money flowing through the system is much bigger. But when you say we're taking over a lot of hectares, etc., can you describe in a few sentences what we is, or how do you take that over? Because it sounds like a big, between brackets, big land grabbing, and we're going to own a lot of land, but it's completely the opposite of your intentions. So for anybody that didn't listen to the previous episodes, when you say we take over the land, what does that entail?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So we see ourselves as the commons. So we are a community. We, Kulturland, Genossenschaft, we are a cooperative, and what we enable through our organization is that citizens pool their capital, and then we make that capital available to secure land. And we have really worked out a legal structure for this, where the ownership of land gets neutralized in a way. So we take it out of private capital and we turn it into a commons. So the idea is that the land never gets sold again. And we have really, in a way, invented a new type of ownership. So it's not private ownership, but it's also not the classical sense of community ownership, but rather the land gets removed from the ownership mind frame in a way. The land belongs to itself, and then we make it available to those people who can be the best stewards to the land. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of how we do this, it's a little bit complicated if you've not dealt with this kind of structure before, and well, we are the first ones to do it. So, but the way we do it is, so we are a cooperative. We enable people to invest money by signing shares in the cooperative. And then when a farm comes to us and wants to buy land and they can't afford it, or if now a farmer wants to hand over his farm to the next generation so he can retire, then we form a legal entity with each farm, and we become a stakeholder in that legal entity, and the farmer becomes the other stakeholder. And we both have a veto right, but the executive party actually is the farm, right? And so what we really do is we stipulate the criteria, which is that the land that we secure has to be farmed organically or regeneratively. And I'm saying regeneratively because we have criteria beyond just organic. And actually, we don't care about the organic label, but rather we care that the farm functions in a regionally, so that the farm either does regional marketing or community supported agriculture, or is breeding local varieties and breeds, or is working with school children. So it really is, it has a social aspect to it, and it has a regional aspect. And 10% of the land has to be put aside for ecological reserve. So it should not be actively farmed, but it should be put aside for, wildlife, birds, and so on. And so when we let me give you an example so it's easier to understand. Let's say a 50-hectare farm that has been farming for many, many years, and most of the land they farm is leased. And let's say 40 hectares of the land is leased and 10 hectares they own. And now the landowner of, let's say, 20 hectares of their land wants to sell it. Or the owner died and the children, they inherited it and they want to sell the land. And now the farmer, he has to buy the land or he's going to lose it. Because, once it's sold, then the new owner, he's going to want to lease it out for a higher price and so on. And so this farm, they come to us and they ask us for help. And so what we do is we set up this new legal entity where the farm becomes the executive party, and we enable it to the community around the farm, or regionally. We also do press work and then people hear about it, to invest by signing shares in our cooperative. And then we take this money, we put it in this legal entity, and then we buy the land. Or actually, we put the money in before because sometimes, we need to buy the land quickly. So we make the money available, we secure the land, and then we ask the people around the farm to invest. And then this land is available in perpetuity.
For the 10-hectare farm that now suddenly is a bigger farm. Yeah. And more secure, because suddenly you can do things longer term that previously when you're leasing is risky and you cannot really plan. And you can have access to this land as long as you're farming organically, regeneratively, and have your social role and not set up a big monoculture pig fattening facility on top of it, obviously. Yeah.
Exactly. So as long as you keep those criteria, the land is yours forever. And we also, we even thought about the case, let's say in 50 years, all of the people who started this organization, they're gone and the next generation comes. And let's say they think, well, now we can make a lot of money selling this land. No, we don't want that. So what we do is we give the farms so if we would ever sell the land, then the farm has a right of first refusal to buy the land, but not for the current market price, but for the price that we bought it for back when we bought it. So let's say we decide to sell the land in 30 years, then they're paying the price that we paid now. Right. So basically they're getting it for a really, really cheap price. There's no incentive for us to ever sell the land.
But still, you don't know what happens in 30 years with the organization, with the people. So you already safeguarded basically the organization and the land to forever stay in the commons. Not at least for as long as you could imagine, and all the potentialities you could imagine now. Obviously, we don't know what happens in the future, but you try to take into consideration everything that could happen and block it from any land grabbing, high exits, villa development, etc.
Exactly. Because I really believe humans are good beings by nature, and we are able to create rules that bring out the best in us. But we all know this from ourselves and from other people, that when we are in a tight spot, we will sometimes act selfishly, and that has very long-term consequences. So if, we thought about how we can set the rules, that kind of selfish behavior is, not possible, at least in that with regard to the ownership of the land and how we make it available.
Thomas, do you have any sort of control mechanisms in there? Because, if you have a smart investor that owns land, he would basically bring all the land into your structure, then basically run the company, hopefully successfully. And then, the time comes where you're like, okay, we might want to sell it. Do you want to buy it for this very cheap price? He buys it back and he's just made, he's made a good deal. So I think, if you are that successful, that business model will scale, which I think all of us will hope that it does, I think there has to be some sort of way of having a control mechanism. I don't know what you guys have in place.
Well, absolutely. This is something that's taken care of. So a cooperative in the legal sense in Germany, so the way it works is that each shareholder, regardless of how many shares they have, only has one vote. This is by law. This is not something a rule that we made up. This is by law. This is for every cooperative in Germany. So it really doesn't, it doesn't matter if an investor gives us 10 million, he only has one vote and we have more than 700 members. So he really has nothing to say. But still, we only allow investors to invest 5% of the total capital. If it's more than that, then we really want to get to know them very well and see who they are, because, that's also a risk. If there's too much capital from one source, then they can also withdraw that capital, and then we might be in a tight spot. And we don't want that.
In the size of the group and the relatively small size of every individual investor, because then of course the investor could pass away and the children might think very differently, and if they suddenly withdraw, like you mentioned, you can cripple an organization or a cooperative like that.
Yeah, and actually we don't allow automatic inheritance of shares, because we want the people to be invested not just with their money but with their hearts. So if it's inherited, then there's, of course, they're not disowned, they still own the shares, but it's a transition period, and then we can approve them as new members. But if we don't, then we will pay them out. There's no automatic right to join the community.
Super interesting.
I think that whenever you start new ways or new thinking, there's a couple of, risks and possibilities that could possibly go wrong involved. But I'm always much more interested in the potential and the things that do work. So if I was a young farmer seeking land or seeking, a way into farming, could I basically make an appointment with you, Thomas, and be like, look, what do you have? I don't care where, I just need land and then I can get going. How could that process look, or is that something that you guys offer?
Yes, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that. So now that we have been taking over entire farms, so let me give you 2 examples of farms that we have recently taken over. The one is a 70-hectare farm east of Dortmund. It's most of it is cropland, quite fertile, and it has 3 houses on it with more than 400 square meters of room to live, so that maybe at least 2, maybe 3 families could live there. And the person who was farming this land, he's retiring. It's a 7th generation farm. They have been farming for more than 200 years there. And his children, they don't want to take over the farm. But this is his life's work. This is his family's generational work. And he has been farming for more than 30 years biodynamically. And so he wants to pass it on to a next generation that wants to continue in this spirit. And for him, he didn't look at the market price, and the market price would be maybe 2.5 million. He didn't look at that. He said, look, what I need is 150,000 euros to buy myself a house, to leave the farm, and 2,000 euros a month retirement. And that, for somebody retirement age, 2,000 a month for the rest of his life, that's maybe 400,000 or 500,000 euros. So what he's asking for is basically 500,000-600,000 euros for a farm that's worth at least 2.5 million. So that's very generous, and we pass on this generosity, so because we get it so cheaply in a way, we can pass it on to the next generation very cheaply in a way. So then now we are setting up a kind of a round table or how to say a video conference where we ask people who are passing or retiring and want to pass on their farms, and young farmers who are looking for farms, we bring them together. And we're asking people to apply for this farm, and we have some people interested, but we need to get the word out, because obviously not everybody knows about this. And we have another wonderful farm like this. It's an 80-hectare farm close to Hanover. It has soils with 95 soil points. So in Germany, they classify the soils from 0 to 100 points. 100 is like you stick your seed in, and the next day you can harvest, basically.
So 95 is pretty good.
Yeah. 95 is pretty good, right? And so he's also retiring, and he's passing it on. And he also is asking for a certain amount so he can, buy himself a house outside. And he's also asking for 2,000 euros a month, and that's it. And there's many. I'm going to another farm on Friday, and there's a few other farms, and so it's just really been taking off. And all of these farms, we really are looking for young farmers to take over.
Man, this is so incredible. I get goosebumps when you tell the story, because I mean this is just so desperately needed, and there's just such an amazing potential. Because especially also in Germany, you have all the discussion about young people not wanting to get into farming, people that not want to take over farms, and what you guys are on in what I see for this. It's really what I always try to tell people as well, that when it comes to land use and having access to land, it's not always just primary production. There's so much more to this. There's so much more value. There's so much more potential business models. And when you tell from those different farms and those different contexts, it's not just a farmer that you're looking for. It's also someone that wants to extract colors from natural produce, or that wants to make deodorants, or that wants to have a leather factory or whatever. And you can bring these people together on the farms in those kind of communities. And these are going to be hotspots of growth and of creativity and of a future and hope. So yeah, it's amazing.
Do you see that, Thomas?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting.
Because you mentioned something very interesting from the biodynamic farmer. You're talking in singular. And then you said this house can probably, or this square meters can probably host 3 families. Do you see those 3 families potentially also living off the farm somehow, the food, the fibers, the oils? Like, could a farm like that, 70 hectares or 80 hectares, support more than just one family? And if so, then suddenly we sort of quadruple the potential, at least social impact.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned that. The potential of creativity just explodes when you don't have, the bank sitting in your neck, and the banks, they only understand classical production models. They're not going to give you a loan if you tell them you're going to do a community supported farm. They don't even understand what that is. They're going to give you a loan if you say you build an industry, pig stable, right? And so if you don't have that financial pressure, then all of these creative potentials are unlocked, and you can try different things. And we see this, especially with community-supported farms. Most of the farms that we buy land with, they are community-supported farms.
Literally, because the community invests.
Yeah, so it absolutely makes sense. But these 2 farms that I just mentioned, it's up to the next generation, whether they want to make it a community-supported farm, or they find other ways with direct marketing, whatever creative way they want to farm land. Let me just give you one example. One of our farms is close to Freiburg, Luzernenhof. We also took over that farm as a whole, and now...
What's the first, if I remember, from our first interview?
Yes, exactly. That was it was the first farm, and I was working and living there as well. I was part of that team that was farming there. And I was just had a small role because I was doing my work for Kulturland, Genossenschaft, but I'm of course a trained farmer as well, and it's my passion, and I really love living on a farm. But yeah, so on that farm it's 33 hectares, and they produce about 3 hectares of vegetables, about 10 hectares of grains. They make cheeses and different milk products and so on. And of course, there's animals, there's pigs, there's calves, and all of that goes to the community. There's 200 families as members of that community supported farm, and they manage to support not just one person. So in Germany now, you could maybe support not even one family with 33 hectares. So you would on average need 60 hectares to support one family.
Okay. Conventional model, 60 hectares to support one family, and probably one of the family members needs to work off farm to make it work.
Yeah. And on Luzernenhof, it supports 10 full-time positions.
Wow.
Right. So this is the kind of factor we're talking about. It's at least a factor of 10. If you're really doing a lot of value added things on your farm. They also make bread, they make milk products, they're a diversified farm and so on. And then you don't get, let's say, 20, 30 cents a liter for conventional milk, but you're turning the milk into high quality cheese, and then you're getting, on the value of the milk, you're getting like €3 per liter of milk in terms of actual value, right? So this is what's possible, and this would be my vision for the future of farming, at least close to populated areas. So I'm thinking, anywhere where there's people, you can have community supported farming. If it's really in the middle of nowhere, then of course community supported farming is not going to be a model that works. And that's not what I'm saying. But I think there's other very interesting models for that as well.
Yeah, super, super interesting. The factor 10 is just very impressive, going from 1-ish on 33 hectares, or in 60 hectares actually, to 10 full time. It's actually a factor of 20 almost. It's crazy what that could support, which means these farms of 60, 70 hectares or 80 hectares you just described, obviously in a different situation, different local community, completely different circumstances. But theoretically, they could support a number of families relatively easily if they have relatively local markets to supply, and obviously the entrepreneurial creativity to do that. But it opens up, because sort of the historic, and maybe you see that now as well, because you're having a lot of these retirement discussions, the historic biodynamic or organic is still one family. It's not really operating the farm as a platform for multiple families. And a lot of the CSA of community supported agriculture ones I know are much more broad, much more flat, and much more as a platform.
So Thomas, just could you talk us through the process? If I decide, look, I need to take more risk and I need more capital for that, and I would be thinking of bringing in some of our land into your organization, what would be the steps? What would be the time frame? What would I have to know and keep in mind? And how would we then basically come together and work together?
And what would it enable you to do?
Well, right. I know the answer to that. Yeah.
Right. Well, I can't answer the second part, but I can tell you what it would look like. And I'm glad you're asking that, because when we worked on building this organization, you as a person, the type of farm that you're running was really what we had in mind. And so you could already, in a way, start the generational transition process where you bring maybe piece by piece, or if you wanted to, you could bring all of your land basically into this kind of mutualized ownership form. And then we could raise community capital on that land, right? So let's say you just want to start with a patch of your land and you want to do something special there. Maybe permaculture or something. And so let's say you put just 10 hectares of land aside for that. Then we create this legal entity, as I mentioned, for those who know the German, know what it means. It's a Kommanditgesellschaft, right? You become the Komplementär, which is the executive party, and we are a Kommanditist, which is in a way, the investing party. And so then the community around your farm, and you have a very strong community, you have a very broad reach, they can then participate by signing shares. And then this money, let's say the land has a value of, lowballing here, let's say 10,000 euros per hectare, then we can raise 100,000 euros on this land. And you, as the owner of the land, you put the land into this legal entity. We buy the land from you in a way, and then the land is still available to you, but you don't own it anymore. You can still farm it as long as you farm it regeneratively. You can use it forever, but at the same time, you have 100,000 euros available to then invest in whatever you want to do on the land. Let's say you want to plant some kind of agroforestry and you have investment costs and so on, then you can cover those costs with that money.
And you pay a rent as the then user, no longer owner, to the organization. How does that work?
Right. So interesting question. So until last year, what we did was that we asked the farmers what they want to pay, basically. So we agreed on a lease on a yearly basis, something between 150 to 400 euros per hectare, which is much below market price, but still in a way a classical model where we're asking a fixed price. And we wanted to move away from that. And we started a new advisory board where all of our farmers are members, and we asked them how we could come up with a better way to organize this. And we took the community supported agriculture as our guiding star. And most community supported farms in Germany, what they do is they have a budget that they need to cover to run their operations, and then they ask the members what they want to pay. So it's not a fixed amount, but rather each member can, in a way, place a bid, then that's what they pay. And so this is what we're doing now. So the farms, they are not asked to pay a fixed price, but rather we say, look, to run our operations, obviously we need operational capital. We have, we have employees. One of them is me, and I also need to make a living. And so we communicate transparently what that budget is, and then the farms, they cover that budget collectively, and each farm is free to pay whatever is possible for them.
Transparently, so I can see what the others are paying or not. Okay.
It's transparent what our costs are. We have not decided yet how transparent we want to be about how much each farm pays. So you would see that farm A paid so much, but do we want to label farm A as Luzernenhof, or do we want to keep it in a way semi-anonymous? We haven't decided on that, but this is how we're doing it starting next year. And then if a farm... So what we need is about 200 euros per hectare, which, as you can probably attest to, Benedikt, is very low for a lease in Germany. And as we grow, that probably gets even lower because, we get more hectares and we don't need to hire that many more people, right? So that's how we operate. And this is how you could, or if you're leasing land, I don't know how much land you own and how much you lease. If one of the owners of the land that you're leasing from wants to sell the land and you don't have the capital to buy it, then also this is what we can do. We create this legal entity, a Kommanditgesellschaft, and then we put the money in to buy the land, and then we ask for the community to participate financially and then secure it long term.
And as an investor, what do I get?
Good question. So what you get is being part of a wonderful community and supporting regenerative local farming, and you get a lot of returns in terms of, social capital, and, we're storing a lot of carbon in the soil by building up CO2, and that, has a huge value in creating biodiversity and so on. But we're not paying any financial returns, no dividends, and the shares are not increasing in value. And nonetheless, it's even though we don't pay financial returns, we have been able to raise, quite a few million euros now.
How many at the moment?
So we're currently at about 4.5 million, and by the end of the year, we look to be at about 7.5 million. And so one of the things actually that I'm working on is lobbying for better support on a political level for what we're doing here. And I'm looking to France, how they're doing it. There's an organization there that we have learned a lot from, Terre des Liens. They're doing something similar to what we're doing. And the French government had created a law 10 years ago where they created a label for social companies. And you're a social company if the income gap between the highest and lowest income is 7-1. And you state in your articles of incorporation that you have a social purpose and a few other criteria, but it's not that complicated. And if you are labeled as a social company, as we obviously are, and maybe you could expand that label to not just social, but ecological, then in France, if you as a citizen invest money up to 20,000 euros, you can deduct that from your income tax. You have to keep that capital in the company for 5 years, and then you can take it out. So just as a quick calculation example, in Germany, the highest tax bracket is 42%. And let's say you are in that highest tax bracket, let's say you invest 20,000 euros, then you're saving that 42% tax. And then 5 years later, you can take that money out. So just in terms of financial returns, you would have made about 8% per year. Now, compared to our 0% today, that's really attractive. And I'm sure that we would have a lot more citizens wanting to invest money if we would get this kind of tax break. And this, I really hope that we can convince the government that this is something they should do, because, now in times of Corona, we want more citizen participation. We want more investing in regenerative anything, right? And we know that the climate crisis is happening, and we need transition finance, and especially in farming. And we're better to generate that transition finance than from citizens, right? So why not create tax breaks? Why should citizens pay taxes on money that they're investing in this kind of transition? To me, it just makes sense, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, think about the potential of capital flowing into that sector. I mean, this is just incredible. The only thing is obviously that, when it comes to the whole lobbying part and politicians and everything that is in front or behind that, they have that money calculated in different areas, and to make them understand the potential and maybe also the, let's say, the economic potential that comes out of it, but also the social possibilities, also costs that they can save. It's, in some sense, it is comparable to changing your style of agriculture to regenerative, where you not only create values on different, on different areas, but you also have an economic benefit because you're not only able to have additional incomes, but you also reduce your costs. So this is actually interesting, the thought process to bring through a politician who obviously, by definition, thinks rather short term than long term. But I mean, you're right. It would be a simple or a relatively simple step to basically change that whole system, and imagine what would be possible if we did.
Is that a bottleneck now, Thomas? Like the flow of money for you guys specifically? Or is the bottleneck the farms you can find, or the land, or the farmers? What would be the biggest leverage point to unlock a lot of this?
Well, a year ago, I would have said, no, it's not a bottleneck. But now that we have so many requests by farms, I would say, yes, it is becoming a bottleneck. And we, until now, have been able to fund all of the land purchases through community capital that we raised from individual citizens. But now, for the first time, we're taking up a larger loan from Triodos Bank, actually.
Friend of the show, first interview of the series. Yeah,
yeah, I hope they're listening in, because they're supposed to send us the offer this week. I hope that the interest rate is nice.
I cannot promise to have it out within a week, Thomas, that they can hear this, but we can reach out to our friends.
Yeah, so I mean, in these days,
that's interesting that you're interacting with the I wouldn't say the old world, because definitely Triodos is not part of the old world, but it's a bank, and that's almost by definition part of an older world, and interesting that you're now interacting with that part of the financial sector, let's say.
Well, yeah, and I have no problem with that. I think it's absolutely fine. We have so much equity. We don't have any outstanding loans, so there's no problem with taking on loans to fund land purchases. But ideally, I would like to be in the situation that Terre Liens is in France, where they have raised more than 100 million euros by now. And in France, actually, pension funds, they have to invest 5% of their capital in these social labeled companies. And they have more than 200 million euros in capital lined up. And they said, well, they don't want to take on that much institutional capital. So they have limited that to 20% because they want this to be a citizen movement.
Which means they go to $1 billion, very simply.
They're heading for $1 billion, and that, I would love to be in that situation.
Yeah, but they have a few more years, I think, under their belt. It's not that fresh, but it's interesting what's happening there.
Also, Thomas, I was going to ask you on this also, going back to an idea that I could be able to bring some of our land into your organization. What is the sort of the time requirement on my side when it comes to not only, speaking to my community and my network to basically try to raise the money, but also maybe sort of, accounting things and organizational things that go around. How much of the pre-work are you guys doing? How much am I doing? Because obviously time is just like the biggest constraint of all of them. So having money lined up, being able to move in fast would obviously be something that would be so appealing to me, because that means I don't have to really do so much about it, right?
Well, yeah, you're not the exception there, right? So the farmers, they are not known to have a lot of time on their hands. Right. So we really do all of the administrative work. So we create this legal entity, and that might sound like a lot of work, but it's not. So we do all of that because that legal entity is only holding the land. It's not active in an economic sense. So it's just copy paste in terms of doing the accounting. On a yearly basis, we do all of that, and the contracts and going to the authorities for the approval and this and that. We do all of that. All you have to then do is to go when the purchase contract is being signed in front of the notary, you are the person going there to sign that purchase contract, not us, because you are the executive party in that legal entity. So it's your signature. And when you then, get leased, so the land lease, interestingly, is you leasing the land to yourself. So the lease contract you sign as leasee and leaser. So we're basically just in there.
It's a very tough negotiation. Yeah.
We're just there to set the frame. We say organic, regenerative, local farming, right? And as long as you do that, it's the land is yours, and you do with it what you want for as long as you want, right? And in terms of, if you were to come to us and you say, look, here's 10 hectares, then obviously we'll have a look at how your farm is set up and whether, we believe that there is a community, because if you're just a farm in the middle of nowhere, you're producing monoculture corn for some industrial production, then it's really tough for us to raise community capital.
But what if the farmer would be interested to transition? Is that something like the conventional sorry, let's finish this part and let's go to that. Like, I'm interested if that's happening.
Well, we have one example there, actually. I can give you an example of where we have actually done that, where we bought 15 hectares of land in the middle of a monoculture desert. And the reason we did it is because there was young people who were super committed. They said they want to do community-supported farming, and we believed in them. And we said, okay, then we do it, right? But we have to believe that it's possible. And in your case, obviously, it's possible. So then from the time that you decide you want to do is to the time where everything is signed and sealed, it can be as short as 2 months. But usually for for a case where a farmer is handing over his farm and we're looking for the next generation, and there's he still has to maybe buy his house to leave the farm, and there's a lot of questions regarding his children. They might still want to get inheritance, and in Germany the law is that children have a right to inheritance, a certain amount, and so you need to find an agreement with the children and so on. And even if there's no agreement, then there's other avenues. And so this process usually takes more than a year. I would say 1 to 2 years. But if the situation is more clear, like in your case, then I would say 2 months. But normally, because you need to go there, we need to get to know each other and this and that, normally it takes 4 to 6 months.
Mm-hmm. And that includes the raising. So includes to get to rally the community of Benedikt, or you're actually saying in some cases you have the capital available to quickly move and then you raise from the community.
We generally have the capital available before. So we put in the money, but we want a commitment from the farm, from the community. So what we're asking for is a non-legally binding commitment from people that they are willing to put up at least a third of the capital. And then once we bought it and we already put up the money, then we're asking for people to put in the money.
To wire. And they can get out at some point. Like as an investor, we're talking about investing here. It's not a donation. You're investing. Obviously, you're getting a ton of non-financial returns, but you're also able at some, if I remember correctly, after a certain amount of years, you're able to sell your shares of the co-op for the value that you bought them, I think, because there's no value increase, obviously, of the shares.
Yes, that's right. So after 5 years, you're allowed to give back your shares, so to say, or at any time, you're allowed to sell your shares to another member. So not somebody outside the community. If it's somebody outside the community, then we need to approve it. But you're allowed to sell your shares at any time to another member, or you give them back to us after 5 years, and then we give you back your money. And in Germany, it's by law that a cooperative, that the value of the shares of the cooperatives remain nominally constant. So the idea of a cooperative structure is that you raise capital within the community to do something that benefits the community, right? And so there's no sense in having increases in share values like you have in a stockholding company. So the value that, the internal value, let's say the value of the land rises, that remains within the company, but you can't take it out with the shares. And that's actually by law, and I think that makes a lot of sense.
And that includes inflation or not?
So you will lose money through inflation. The value remains nominally constant. We could choose to pay a dividend, but we choose not to because the money, the land values is so astronomical. Land costs up on average 30,000 euros in some areas, up to 100,000 euros now. And if you look at how much a farmer can earn farming his land, on average, an organic farm earns about 480 euros per hectare, and a conventional farm about 420 euros per hectare. So if you compare that to the value of the land, that's maybe 1.3 to 1.5%. Now, we are asking in terms of the lease, so to say, that farms are paying, that's between 0.6 and 1.5%. And we need that to run our operation, to overhead, for overhead. So there's nothing left over to pay dividends. It doesn't really make sense.
Return.
One more question regarding the model. If, for example, we often have many visitors or volunteers and interns, and some of which by the end of the internship, we get on so well, and there's so many possibilities and thoughts and ideas that we can do, or that we can basically start a side project or a side business. And it's often always involved with a capital investment. Now, there could be a possibility of basically using your model, bringing in some of the land, basically thereby raising capital, which then would obviously be leased by me again. But then I could basically lease it to the ex-intern, for example, and at the same time make it available for him or her, and he or she could then also use the capital, for example, to invest in a greenhouse or whatever. So first question, is that possible? Because this would be important to me because, it's my home. So I wouldn't want to give it to someone for 30, 50 years without having an idea if are they going to kick my dog or whatever, So that's one thing. And the other thing is thinking about an investment that goes with it. Are you already thinking about that step where it's not only about the land, but maybe also adding an additional sum of investment that, basically could be a technical greenhouse that is then not only 100,000 K if we think about that model, but maybe 200,000.
All right, so let me answer the first part. So if the land belongs to you and you, we talked about this before, if you need capital to invest in order to, enable a transition or enable a new person to farm that land, then absolutely, this is possible. Then, you sell the land and you neutralize, through our structure, you neutralize the ownership, and then, the land is still available, and then you can absolutely make that available to whoever you trust, and but then you are legally required to make sure that they keep the requirements, which is obviously regenerative local farming. But as long as you do that, it's up to you. The land is still within your full purview. There's no restrictions as long, yes, this is the restriction, but beyond that, there's no restriction. You can do whatever you want with the land and make it available to anyone you want. So to your second question, with regard to buying or investing in greenhouses or so on, that's tricky because we don't want to be the owners of greenhouses, right? So, we can make capital available, as I just said, and then you can buy the greenhouse, right? But just recently, because, when we take over a whole farm, obviously there's buildings on there and we need to take them as well. But the way we do it is, we take the farm as a whole, but then when we pass it on to the next generation, the ownership of the land stays within our structure. So that's in this commons legal framework. And the buildings, they are tied to it through a long-term lease, which is called an Erbpacht. So we sell the buildings, but it's still tied to the land through a 99-year lease contract. And as part of this contract, we stipulate the criteria that you as the owner of the buildings and you living there in those buildings have to also farm the land. So you can't decide to stop farming but still live there, right? So it's still tied together. And we also make the contract so that even though you're the owner of the buildings, when you pass it on to the next generation, you can obviously sell it, but you can only sell it for a reasonable price, which is an objective measure. So you can't, kind of stop the transition to the next generation by kind of asking for a ridiculous price. And so we enable this kind of transition finance by also buying the buildings, and then we sell the buildings for a very, very, very cheap price to the next generation. And for example, the farm I mentioned worth 2.5 million, including the buildings and everything. He's giving it to us for 650,000. Then, we don't need to ask a lot of money for the buildings, right? So we just sell it for a super low price, but still something, because I think, you still own the buildings, right? And that's a real value that you're getting. And you don't have an issue to get a loan from the bank for a very, good interest rate, right? So you're paying less than 1%. And why shouldn't you, let's say the buildings are worth 500,000 and then we give it to you for 250,000. Why shouldn't you pay 250,000 for that if you're getting 500,000 worth? Because then, one day you will be able to sell it again, right? So this is how we're thinking. Maybe through feedback and different experiences, we'll change our thinking on this, but currently this is how we are.
So what happens if we go through the process and then I want to take a loan, which then as a security, I would usually bring in the land that I have, which I've just basically sold to you. How does that work?
Well, that's not possible, because you can't take a loan with the land as a security, because you need our approval now. And we're not going to give that approval because we don't want the land to be sold again. And, if you, if your farm doesn't operate well and whatever, and then the bank would come and take the land, then the land would be lost, right? And this is something that we don't want. So you can sell your land for a reasonable price. We're going to, raise market value for it. But beyond that, you can't leverage your land twice. That doesn't make sense.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily call it leveraging it twice, but it's just a process that you have to keep in mind, because that's what happens in practical agriculture, right? You go to the bank, you get a loan, and the security is the land. So it's a thought process that is obviously in there, and it's an option. It's an option that you don't have anymore, right? And if we go back to the 10 hectare, 100,000 euro example, it sounds like a lot of money, but it really isn't that much. If you think about large changes and investments, it's gone pretty fast. So, it's a relevant question.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned it, because, of course, this is also a relevant question for the farms that we work with. And the wonderful thing is that we here have a community that obviously is willing to invest and take money in their hands. And we built our own web platform. We programmed it ourselves, and each farm has its own website where you can go and you can choose to invest. And the farms are free to also use that to raise capital for themselves. And just to go back to the example of Luzernenhof, they needed money to invest in new stables and cooling facilities and this and that. And they needed to raise something like, I think, 450,000. And so they just put out the word and they said, look, we're willing to pay an interest rate of up to 1.5%. So 0 to 1.5, you're free to choose. And then people came and they gave loans and they raised the money in no time. It was oversigned.
It's amazing.
But without the land as a security. That's what you're saying.
Without using the land as security, they got the money they needed. And they even had more money offered than they needed. So they could choose basically the lower interest offers. And in the end, they are paying an average of 0.6%, which no bank is going to give you a loan for less than 0.6%.
That's amazing. It's just fantastic. But I would love to get to know some of the investors into your structure. So could you just tell us, what are these kind of people? Is there a certain type, or is it completely versatile? I'd love to hear some of those human stories behind it.
Empirically, we haven't, I can't tell you the average age or so on, but from my feeling and knowing a lot of them, I can tell you that the average age is probably around 40 plus, maybe 45 to 50, and obviously some older and obviously some younger, but this is the average age. And I would say a little bit more female than male. Mm-hmm. Noticeable. And most of them, they have a direct connection to the farm. So 85% of people who are investing, they have a direct connection to the farm, either because they're buying products from there, they're a CSA member, or they have been to the farm, or they somehow have friends working there, or they visited the farm at one point. There's some kind of personal connection. And 15%, they don't have a personal connection, but they think this idea as such is really great. And those 15% are actually the ones that are willing to invest more money. So on average, the people, they give maybe the lowest amount is 500, and there's quite a few people who give 500 euros. And, but the average amount is about, 3,000 euros if you don't take into consideration the people who give larger amounts, like 20,000 plus. And those 15% that they don't have a direct connection to the farm, they just think this idea of land as a commons to make it available for the next generation, for sustainable regenerative regional farming, they are usually the ones who are willing to put in larger sums between 20,000 and 150,000. We even have one person that made 1 million available. So half of our capital is from those 15%. Mm-hmm. Half of our capital is from the 85%, right?
Amazing. And I mean, going back to what you said about lobbying, I think, those people, those investors, if investor is the right term, but those people who see the value in this, I mean, they are one of your biggest strengths, I guess, right? So I was wondering, do you have some sort of form where you kind of bring them together, or you have some sort of community that is basically working and getting to know each other and communicating? Because these are the people that have to tell all the other people what they are doing and why they're doing it and how much fun it is. I mean, this is such a huge potential to basically make this thinking, this knowledge, this form of investing known to other people, and through this sort of bottom-up experience, initiate some sort of pressure towards political thinking and so forth. So is that something that you utilize at all?
Well, we try really hard, and we're still open to, and when we're exploring different avenues. But I think the biggest potential here is always regional. So the farms, we support the farms in doing events or panel discussions, or one of us goes there, or we also invite other people to give a talk, and then we create an event, and then the community around the farm, they come and they listen. And this is how we engage the local communities. But in terms of the larger community, all of the 700 plus members that we have, it's really hard to bring all of them together. And I would say we as a national organization, we are not where most people feel the strongest emotional bond. So the emotional bond usually happens on a regional level. And this is something that we really aim for as we grow in the number of farms. Now we're 20 farms, and I think as we grow to maybe 100 farms, and then maybe one day 1,000 farms, then as we have a certain number of farms, let's say at least 5 farms in a certain region, then you can create regional structures where then it's possible for people to really come together. Because it's just, Germany is still a fairly large country, obviously not compared to, geographically compared to the US, it's still small, but still it's a huge effort to come together. Let's say, we invite them to attend some event, then some of them would have to travel.
But it's also the local laws, like the regional laws, and the local politicians you want to really engage and understand and take action, which is much easier if they can easily visit one of the farms, if they can see, if they can touch, if they maybe even can participate and invest themselves personally, and you get a whole different dynamic and discussion.
Yeah, and this is something we still need to figure out, how we can utilize the community best in that way. So we provide them obviously with information. We provide them with flyers, and we have a handbook that is that describes us as an organization, as a community, and we have a nice website, and we have nice videos. But still, I think there is a lot of room for potential to utilize that potential a little bit.
And just to get it out a bit of the German context specifically, and to end with a few questions, because I know, and I don't know the details about it, but you do. For anybody that's not listening, let's say in the rest of Europe, that's not listening in Germany, how easy is it? Because you're talking about some cases very small investments, in some cases quite a lot larger, 600,000, 700,000, etc. But always the term of the transaction costs are always an issue. Small tickets, it's difficult to put 50K to work. If for many people it's difficult to understand, like it's much easier to put 5 million or even 50 million to work, because the cost of doing the due diligence and doing the whole process, the prospectus and everything, it just makes more sense on larger numbers. But you mentioned that in Europe or in the EU, there's actually some interesting things that have changed the last few years. Not many people are knowing about it, and you're actually using that to make a lot of these concepts flow. Can you describe a bit what has changed? I think it's 2017 or 18, and what makes that possible for anybody that's actually in Europe that is thinking, wow, I should do this in Portugal, or I should do this in Spain or Italy, Greece, etc.
I'm glad you mentioned that. So yeah, there have been significant changes that I think went mostly under the radar for most people. So one of the big issues was that after some shady investments were offered in the past, the new regulations were put in place that required any investment offering over 100,000 euros to issue a prospectus. And for those who don't know what that is, it's basically a very thick legal document that costs between 30 and 50,000 euros in lawyer costs to make, right? And so if you're raising 100,000 euros and you have to spend at least 30,000 to raise that money, it doesn't make just legal costs.
With just legal costs. Imagine the cost of the raising, the platform.
It doesn't really make sense at all. And so they realized that they made a mistake there, to be honest. And so in 2017, they revised this law and they said that up to 1 million euros, you don't need to issue a prospectus anymore. Each country has to kind of create its own regulation as to what they require, but it should be simple. Basically, that's what the EU law said. And up to 8 million, each country is free to choose whether they want to stipulate the prospectus requirement or have their own local law. Important is that whatever regulations they put in place, it still has to enable the free flow of capital between EU countries. So Germany opted for no prospectus requirement up to 8 million in investments. And last year, they made this new law where they stipulated the criteria, what is now required. And this is a very simple pamphlet, which is allowed to be maximum of 3 pages. And it just has to have the information on your balance sheet and, your past year's performance, and a legal disclaimer where it says, look, this is a private offering and it's a high risk investment and you could lose all of your investment. And that's basically it. You send that to the Financial Regulatory Office and they have to give you the go or no go within 10 days. And then you're free to raise up to 8 million for every single investment. So this is especially important for us raising money through shares. This has been exempt already before. So for us, it wasn't really an issue. But for farms to raise capital to invest in stables from the community, this was a huge issue because they couldn't raise more than 100,000. And now there was a legal gray area. We had an agreement with the financial regulatory authorities where we kind of used a loophole. But basically now there's no more headaches in terms of the legal framework, and now any farm can raise up to 8 million through community capital, and we have the IT infrastructure available where this is very easily possible. You have your if you're part of the Kulturland community, you have your own website, and then people can go there. They can choose to invest in whatever you want to offer.
And this could be all over Europe. Just saying, this might be slightly different in different countries because Germany chose the 8 million and chose the pamphlet, but it has to be a simple process in every different country when you're raising more than 100. That's very, very interesting and foreign.
Exactly. And so this is possible all over Europe, and the IT that we built, it's something we built and want to make available for any eco-social project. So we keep it.
So get in touch when you want to do this.
We're still developing it, and I would say maybe in a year's time, the software is available for anyone to use. But get in touch if you want to use it, and then we'll work. We'll talk with you and see when we can make that happen. And we're happy to make that available to anyone.
Super. And just to bring this conversation home, Benedikt, this has been a long series. We're at the end. Actually, we're going to do another episode where we look back. But at this episode of The Crowd, and super practical because we're talking Germany. You are based in Germany. And what brings this to mind, or if you have in a few sentences, what's your feedback? What are your ideas going through your head right now at the end of this episode with Thomas? And then I will ask Thomas the same, actually.
Well, there's so many things. One, I think that is always so dominant when you hear of initiatives like this. And there are so many which we all don't know of, right? And it's incredible what people already do in that regard. But you always think, why is not everyone talking about this? Why is not politics saying, oh my God, we have found an amazing solution that does so much good and that has so much potential? This is always one thing that goes through my mind. And I mean, with regard to Thomas and I guess his team, I'm just deeply impressed by, the whole thought process they have actually gone through. And that is something that has so much detail, and it goes down to so many different aspects you have to keep in mind, and you have to think through, and you have to communicate on a short term, but also on a long term period. And I think it's incredible what kind of, not only thought process they have developed, but also the kind of decisions that they took. And quite, I guess there was a lot of discussions around them, but this sounds very holistic, if you ask me. And I'm just really grateful that Thomas and his team have done this and are going through this. And I think this has an enormous potential. I'm already looking forward to, a couple of years' time, we'll be like... You
guys need to meet.
Yeah, I spoke to Thomas back in the day when they only had when
he was still accessible. Yeah.
8 million on the balance sheet now, So, I think it's there's going to be amazing times to come. And Thomas and that kind of thinking and those kind of ways are going to have an incredible influence on this. So I think it's our task of all of us to basically make sure that this information gets out and is being pushed, and that we collectively basically see that, we can grow this movement. So good stuff, Thomas. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
Any final words, Thomas, in this on this episode?
Well, I think what I didn't say at all this time is really my motivation to do all of this. And, we're talking about a lot of numbers, and that's just because this is the world we live in. We live in a world of numbers and metrics and regulations, and this is the things we have to deal with to make things work. But this really comes from a very deep place, our motivation. And I studied economics, and I was very disillusioned with the kind of picture of humanity that is portrayed there. This Homo economicus, the selfish human that is just working in self-interest. I never believed that, and when I got to know the comments, Elinor Ostrom, how she's showing us that there's another way of working together, there's a way to, and it really works. It has worked for hundreds of years, even thousands of years, where communities have managed their own resources. And so this is really a guiding star, and to really enable young people, and also, of course, old people who
young at heart,
young at heart, who are connected really deeply in their hearts and souls with the land, with the plants and the animals, and they want to enable communities to
create
flourish.
Abundance. That's the only place you can do that.
Yeah, so this is really what inspires me, and this is why I love my work so much. I'm really glad.
Even when you go through all the legal details in our numbers world at the moment. Yeah. And we salute you for that, because it's work that should be done, has to be done. I know you like it and enjoy it, but for some people like me, it's very difficult to imagine somebody enjoys that piece. And I see Benedikt laughing, which means I think he thinks the same. So thank you so much, both of you, for your time, your energy. I really hope you'll be able to meet soon in person, meaning visiting the farm of Benedikt, and start dreaming and practicing and seeing what is possible there. And we'll for sure be checking in on that. Thank you so much for your time this morning, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for listening to this episode, which is part of the Transition Finance series, trying to find appropriate transition finance to speed up regenerative agriculture on farms. For feedback, ideas, suggestions, please contact us through Twitter or via the contact page on the website, investinginregenerativeagriculture.com. Please share this episode with a friend and give us a 5-star rating, which really helps others to find the podcast. All the episodes of the series can be found on the website and in your podcast app. Thank you, and see you next time. Dear friends of the podcast, I'm super excited to share with you the online video course Investing in Regenerative Agriculture and Food. how to put money to work in regenerating soils at scale and growing a lot of tasty food while doing it. Why are we doing this course? After 100 interviews and more than 100 hours of audio asking the question how to put money to work in regenerating soils, and have been following the space since 2011 and recording these podcasts since 2016, we thought it was time to share our lessons learned. What have we seen in the space over the last years? How have we built our decision-making framework? What to focus on with the podcast? How have we picked interviewees? What questions should you ask? What is happening in the space? What should you read? What should you listen? What should you watch? How to approach this space? For whom is this course? You, the soil builders and investors in this space. The soil builders, people working in this space, entrepreneurial farmers, fund managers, vehicle builders, crowd investing, platform builders, ag-tech companies, farm-to-gut food companies, permaculture, keyline designers, holistic management consultants, etc., etc. People that are building soil at scale. And the investors who are putting their own money to work through their family office or as private individuals, or people who are putting other people's money to work through foundations, institutional capital, banks, insurance companies, etc. Is this course free? No. This is pay what you think it's worth. Meaning, I have no way of knowing what this course will be worth to you. And I'm very aware that among the listeners of this podcast, we have people with very different means. So I'm inviting you, if this course is creating value to you, and if you have the means, to consider paying what you think it's worth. Thank you. So what is this course? It's currently a series of 17 videos, mostly ranging from 10 to 15 minutes, plus PDF slides, so you don't have to ride along. We're gonna look into why invest in regenerative agriculture and why extractive agriculture is so risky, how to invest, what kind of frameworks you could and I think should build, what to invest in, what kind of co-investors you could find, or what kind of investors you could find if you're a soil builder. Every lesson will have a digging deeper part where I will share what kind of reports, what kind of interviews, what kind of videos you can look into if you want to dig deeper. We're going to look at nutrient density, landscape design, and a lot more. So what is it not? It's not a list of investable deals. Unfortunately, that doesn't exist in this world. We're really at the beginning of the regenerative agriculture and food revolution. It's also not investment advice. Before making any investment, please find professional investment advice. So get ready, get a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, or whatever you're drinking. Click on the link below, sign up, and I'm really looking forward to your feedback.